Here we go. And I have some notes that I'll be referring to. Keith Baizer, I'm going to start by kind of taking you through my woodworking journey. I'm going to talk about all of you a little bit. Talk about how I got into this whole game and when I do it and what I do. And then I'll talk a little bit about wood, preparing the wood, how I look at a tree, what I'm looking for in the tree. When it comes to the wood, I'll talk about how with this particular type of turning, we chuck it on the lathe and how we line it up or don't line it up based on certain things. And then we'll talk a little about sharpening, and then we'll whale away and see what we can come up with. So last meeting, we had this discussion about dividing the President's Challenge into the beginners, the experienced, the intermediate. And I went home and I said, wait a second here. Everybody in this room, there are probably 500 people in the metropolitan area of 2.3 million people that can do what you guys are doing. Everything you do, everything you turn, everybody you know walks in that room and says, wow, you did that? Don't worry about what level you are, because you're at a level way above what the rest of the world is. There are very few people that even have the guts to stand in front of this thing and try. And every mistake that you've made, that anybody in this room has made, not only I, but everybody else in the room has made that mistake. So there's something that you might have heard called the 10,000 hour rule. The 10,000 hour rule says it takes 10,000 hours to master any process. And that's misconstrued. That is, if, for example, if you can't walk and chew bubble gum at the same time and you want to play in the NBA, probably will take you 10,000 hours, but there might be a few other things that you need to do. But you're 5,000 hours in just by being in this room. You have a passion for something. You're willing to learn. You know other people that are passionate about what you do. So you're halfway there. And a lot of it is what your skill set is going in, but a lot of it's just your passion to learn. So you're there. So the horizon, I'm going to talk about some like esoteric things, and half you're going to look at me like, this guy's crazy. But when you look at a horizon and you walk toward your horizon, you never get closer to that horizon. One of my problems in my wood turning and woodworking life is that I've been fortunate to study and work with some guys that have set a horizon that I will never get to. And when I realize that these guys have been turning 8 hours a day for 50 years, and I step back and I say, wait a second, my horizon has to be my process, what I enjoy, the goals that I set for myself, what I'm trying to learn. So just belly up to the lathe, stand in front of that thing as much as you can. Even though we're all nervous about mistakes, we all make them. I make a lot of them. And good firewood, and for me, good bowling balls, because I'm kind of on a hill in my shop, so I just bowl them and see how far into the woods they go. So, so my journey, first of all, when I talk about some of these names and people that taught me and people I've worked with, it's like, you know, woohoo. They're available to everybody and anybody. Contemporary American Crafts is really a group of just friendly, nice people. And you can walk into almost anyone's studio. You can call, email just about anyone and get an answer. And that's what's really nice. So the exchange of ideas is great. So when I talk about David Ellsworth, Stuart Batty, and the guys that I've worked with, remember that there are no famous wood turners. Barbara Dill, who's amazing, she does these off-axis things, she's unbelievable. She says we're just a bunch of woodworking nerds. So if the one famous wood turner in the world was sitting in this room, he would just be another wood turning nerd. William H. Macy is the only famous wood turner in the world, but he's famous for movies like Fargo. There's no famous wood turners. So see one, walk up to him, introduce yourself, talk to him, ask him questions. So when I was 18, I'll get to this business eventually. When I was 18 or 19, I was in college and I was moving into an apartment with a guy, 2-bedroom thing. And I needed furniture for the apartment. So I'd grown up around tools and fixing stuff and breaking stuff and fixing stuff. And I said, I need furniture. So my dad introduced me to a guy and his name was Norbert Marklin. Well, I found out from his brother Ray about 10 years later that Norbert was a photographer, but he's who taught me woodworking at the beginning. So I started getting interested in it. And these things were what they were. First things I ever built. I got married, and when I was about 29, I think, I went to my first adult summer camp at Penland, North Carolina, Penland School of Crafts. And I was doing flat work then, so didn't even know what wood turning was. Spent 2 weeks there and started progressing. And then the next year I went to a place called Anderson Ranch in Snowmass. And this was a 3-week program. And I walk in and there's this crazy Englishman named Stephen Proctor. Little did I know that Stephen is known as technically the best woodworker in the world, the finest hand skills, and he could accomplish things that nobody can with tools and wood. He stayed with me one time when he was driving through to Anderson Ranch, and he pulls out this piece, and I'm like, Stephen, are you kidding me? This thing's unbelievable. I said, there aren't 5 people in the world that can do that. He looks at me and says, Keith, there aren't 2 that can do that. So what did I learn from Stephen? He worked with me on shaping wood, twisting wood with shaping. But one of the most important things I took with me from that class was that Stephen liked to throw firecrackers and shoot bottle rockets off his balcony at people. No, that's not it. So that everything that he did and built was about form. Everything's about form. He says everything he builds, he was stretching it, he paints black because it's all about, it's not about Gugabula, and that's his term for some of these crazy woods, is about form. Paint it black, step back and look at it. Everything's about form and line. So left there, and then my wife and I, we started having kids. So building a piece of furniture took me probably 40 hours and it took a lot of time. And suddenly I didn't have that time. So I said, oh, we need something that's a little more instant gratification, thinking that wood turning is you just go up and you make something and it's done. And as we all know, that's just a little bit of it. So a couple years later, I said, I need to go take a class. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I started looking online, and I chose the teacher because of one sentence. I do 90% of my cuts with 2 tools. So I said, oh, I can learn to sharpen 2 tools. Signed up. Not knowing that David Ellsworth is the most famous, or not famous, famous wood turner in the world, and kind of the Zen king of woodworking. So I went up and spent 4 or 5 days with him in the class, ordered a big lathe, came back. The lathe didn't come for 2 years. Forgot everything I learned. So I went back to David Ellsworth and learned again, and then started messing around, started turning. And my journey started, and it was rough, whatever. It was fun, it was enjoyable. It's my sanctuary. It's where I am at peace in my shop. So off for 2 years, on for 2 years, off for 2 years. Well, then when they tore all the ash trees down at the arch, there were 800 ash trees lining this sidewalk. And the ash borer beetle was going to kill them. And the designers of the national park didn't want 2 lines of trees going through the middle of this new park. So they tore the trees down. So I said, oh, I have to get some of that wood. You don't get that wood unless somebody says, do you know Castle Construction? I said, oh, I've been friends with Rich Ledbetter my whole life. Call Rich. He says, we'll have 5 logs for you on the south levee. So I got these 5 logs. Anybody working for the government here, just shut your ears. So we joke to this day, we call them federal offense logs because they were taken from a national park. So I started turning more and more, and then again, on, off. And the passion came back even stronger during this COVID thing, when a very safe place to be, was in the shop making things. So, and here I am now. So One thing Stephen talked about, back to Proctor, is he talked about the heiress. And there's no spelling of it because there was no spell correct, so I don't even know what it means. But he said, remember, this is me. This is everything we talk about is me, the way I do things, the way I've learned, the tools I have. So he talked about the heiress. I don't know how to spell it, but the heiress is the point where two lines meet. And what he said about the heiress is, for goodness sake, stop rounding everything off. Stop making everything round, not round bowl, but all the edges and making these round things. Now, if it's a functional bowl, you're eating out of it or something, that's one thing. But just knock those edges off, because what that heiress does is it creates the reflection and the shadow that makes furniture or other pieces more interesting. So that was kind of an interesting lesson from him. I went to my first symposium. We're not that far. My first symposium, and I saw a guy named Stuart Peter Batty, who's the last English apprentice wood turner. So David Ellsworth teaches turning on pull cut with a 60-degree grind, and we'll get into that. Stuart Batty teaches on a 40-40 grind with a push cut. So I came back from that. Oh, and both of them think that what they do is the only way to turn. So I'm getting comfortable doing this, and this guy says do this with a different grind. And so I came back, and that was a rough year. So I spent my time not knowing what to do. And then at another symposium, if you ever get a chance, go. If it's within your means, if it's close enough to drive, if it's a regional one, you will learn from the demonstrators and from the other people there, because everybody knows something, or you can learn from their mistakes too. So what you'll see when I turn is now I use both tools. What I'm doing here, I won't use the 40-40 grind very much, but I realize that there is no right way. And everybody in this room turns a little differently. And that's the way the American wood turning movement developed. Whereas England, it was an apprentice. This is the way you cut. This is the only way to cut. This is the most efficient way to cut. And in America, there were just 5 or 10 guys that, a lot of them were ceramicists, and they said, oh, I cut this way. And the other guy said, oh, I cut this way. And the other guy said, oh, I chuck it this way, and whatever. And they kind of put together the way of turning. And that's one reason we all turn differently, because we watch different people, and every single person does it differently. What I'm going to show you is just my way to do it. And remember, anything can happen. Fortunately, there's plexiglass this way. We're in a little trouble back here, but we'll try to fire some shavings in his protective goggles. So one more thing about symposium, I went to see a guy named Jacques Vessery, and he's from Maine, not from France. It's not quite as romantic. And he says when he does classes, he just has people turn the outside of the form and then leave them. And then he and the shop assistant, they paint them black and they put them on a wall. And he says that 12 feet, stand back 12 feet to look at form, and that's where you see form best. So then he throws them away and says, do it again. Everybody's like, oh, I want to go home with a bowl or a vessel. And he says, no, no, no. The outside's the bowl. We'll figure out how to do the inside, 3 days in. So form, form, form. And really all I've been working on for years is just this step, is just continuous curve. And there's, more to it, but in wood turning, just with kind of what I'm doing, there's so many ways to go that, it's endless without doing piercing and punching and painting and carving, which someday I can get to, or doing pens or doing platters or Navajo basket illusion. I could go till the end of time just messing around with form and different things. So that's that. So Ellsworth, and I'll talk about this as we go. So I bumped into him at this last symposium. He probably is the one that gave me COVID. Can you edit that out? But I'm talking to him, and I talked to a ceramics teacher from my high school, and I never took ceramics, but I knew the guy, and he said, you can't, with ceramics and wood, it's very, unless you're a production turner and you're doing something specific for somebody that needs a 12-inch bowl that's 3 inches, very difficult to draw what you're doing. And he says, it goes from your head through your heart to your hands. He said, it can't go from your head to your hands. So part of that is kind of the Zen and emotional way that I turn and turn by feel. But it's also that each piece of wood's a snowflake. You know, these pieces I'm going to put up there, I can see from the outside, there might be some little naughty bits, as Stephen Proctor used to say, in there, but it's dictated by the wood or, you know, time or whatever is going on. So that's really important. So what David talks about is focusing on the process and not the end result all the time. When I was turning 2 hours a week or 2 hours a month, I always wanted to finish. I have to get something done. I have to get something done. So I'd be all tense and tight. And now that I'm turning more, I'm able to push it a little further, make more mistakes, but the pieces that I'll finish will probably, we'll see, maybe, probably be a little better because I'm pushing it, knowing that if I blow it up, it goes in the firewood pile, and I can chuck another piece of wood up there and get after it. So so David said, he stops. The all-knowing David Ellsworth says, the process supports the soul and the end product supports the ego. Makes sense. So when I'm turning, there's a certain piece. It's kind of, you know, my meditative way here. We play the lathe like a musical instrument. Think of this. So when you're operating your table saw, the blade's fixed. Hopefully you've joined an edge. Wood's flat, square, and you push it through a fixed blade. With the lathe, you're playing this lathe like a musical instrument because you're playing that wood, you're playing the tool, and your body is moving around like you're a violin player at the symphony. So it's pretty cool to stand in front of this and kind of do that dance. The last thing I'm going to talk about before I jump into the wood is Michelangelo's. We all are Michelangelo. He did his sculpting by a subtractive process. So he got this big block of wood and he chopped away mass to get to whatever he made. And what we're doing as wood turners is we're kind of little Michelangelos. We are removing mass. That's all we're doing to get to this final product. If we remove too much mass, we either make a little turn or adjustment or start over. So we're all sculptors and we're all Michelangelos. So I just untied my shoe. So the first skill is to tie a shoe. Thank you very much. That's the end of the demonstration. Thank you. Thank you. Wood. I don't buy wood. And one reason I don't buy wood is because when I make a mistake now, I just burn it. And I was going to bring a piece and I might bring it next week. And it's the reason I don't buy wood. I didn't even buy this piece. And it was so beautiful. I'm turning this thing and I was so nervous. It was a hollow vessel. You know, I was so nervous about ruining it that I ruined it. It was like 1/8 of an inch or a little bit more all the way. And then it became like 1/2 inch, like halfway down, because I was like, I don't want to blow this thing. So I don't want to, where's my engineer? Can you fix me? Here's the second. I haven't even started turning and I'm making mistakes. Okay, there we go. I knew that was going to happen. So, and I like wood of significance. So, you know, if I find wood in your yard, I'd like to get a piece and make you something from your yard. The wood from the arch, I find wood from my grade school. I find wood from my kids' school. And I tell people the hardest part of wood turning, tongue in cheek, is getting the wood on the truck. And gravity takes it off, you chainsaw it up, and then getting rid of your shavings. Is Bob Goulding watching? Bob says he has 9 paths in his backyard, and then he moved to Arizona. So that's what he does. So the tree, the wood, the tree. So I knew I had a marker. Here it is. When I'm looking at a tree, the first thing I'm going to do, and this is from John Jordan, so I had a tree like this. Generally, let's make it like that. So the grain is going like that. And then this crack along the pith is like that. So what you hear from a lot of people is always cut it down the line of where the crack is. Well, how am I going to work with this tree? What I'm looking for, what are we here? You can put the tree up there. So that tree there, the part I circled in blue, that's something I look for in a natural edge bowl. So I'm looking for dips and swirls and different shapes along the rim because it creates a lot of interest. So this particular piece, I knew that right there, that's my home run right there. I wanted to do a bowl that was right in there. Okay. And there, the bowl, the next one, next slide, shows that little dip. And as I get further into that tree, that dip's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I'm going to turn it right down the line, and there'll be a series of bowls right down that line. So what did I do with the rest of that tree? So then I went like that, cut the pith out, went like that. So I had these pieces here. So these pieces here, when they come out of the tree like that, they're kind of a pain to turn, but you can turn a great natural edge bowl by just you want to take that bottom piece off so it's in line with the rings. And when it's in line with the rings, you have a natural edge bowl. You can pass these around, and these are unsanded, but you have that bowl. I'm so far out of that gives you that effect. And when you talk about form and line, that's what we want. We want those natural circles around, and that's a piece of wood that fortunately was positioned very well on the lathe. This piece here is the piece out of here. So we have the one that was on the slide, which is that. We have these 2 pieces here, and then we have this one here. So that's what I'm looking for. The rest of the bowl, the rest of that wood, I'll get into it, and it'll be great and turn some great stuff. But I took prime piece 1A right out of there. So I'm not going to get, there are people here that know a lot more about shrinking and water and wood than I do, obviously. So I'm not going to get into that. But with the natural edge bowl, though it does move, because it's an uneven edge, you don't really notice it as much. It is shrinking, but you're not going to notice that as much because you don't have that flat top there. So I get that wood, I cut it with a chainsaw. I don't really care how big the bowl is. I don't have an order from somebody that says I need 15, 12-inch bowls. It just says, I just say I want to make a bowl. So I'm not that concerned with getting maximum yield. So I just look at the tree and figure out, I don't say like, oh, I need a bowl, so I need to do this huge thing there. And I don't turn big things very frequently. I just kind of find the middle somehow, sometimes with a compass, and then I just nip the corners off. I don't worry about bringing it to round. I don't cut it to a circle in a bandsaw because, as you'll see, I'll get it to round pretty quickly here. So now I'm going to chuck it up and get started, see what happens. Any questions? So all questions are good. Stop me, not in the middle of a cut, but stop me, ask questions. I call live edge with bark, natural edge is without bark. To get a live edge, I say a live edge bowl is a parlor trick. It's like the guy that has one magic trick, and everybody goes, "Wow, you're the best magician." It's a lot of it's when the wood is cut. So cut in the winter when there's not all that moisture in the called the plenum, between the bark and the wood, because that makes it really loose. And certain types of trees are going to be better. Certain ones are just going to go flying off. And good tool skills and then luck. And one thing you'll never see me doing is running around my shop looking for a piece of bark. Or I've seen people that match up. Oh, if I find this piece, maybe it'll match up, and then super glue their fingers to the bowl, and then go to their, the farmer's market, sell their arm with the bowl. But I'm not that into the bark. And one thing that's semi-unfortunate about the bark, it's really cool when it happens. And I would cut differently with the bark. I'd cut right from the beginning when I'm rounding it off. I'd cut down from the top. But if I put, I'll just say 20 bowls out, and there's somebody that's an uneducated buyer, and the one with the bark is just a piece of garbage, and the other ones are just really nice forms, almost every non-educated kind of collector is going to go, "Ooh, I want the one with the bark." So I don't give them a choice quite frequently. The wood I'm turning today, I cannot believe I'm looking for a marker that's in my pocket. So you see the pith is down here. Wait, where's the camera? Am I in it? Okay, camera's here. So you can see the pith is way down here, but this crack across the wood is there. Now, if I cut the wood here, I'm going to have this way out of balance thing with the grain is way over here. Now that's fine. If you don't get it lined up, it's okay, but it might be a little, like people might. If you are going to make it out of alignment, do it this way if you want. Make it way out of alignment. Here, Charlie, grab that second one. No, the second one from the other side. There you go. So you can see this one, make it way off. So it's like, has some visual interest. But this piece of wood, I cut it here and here. So the rings were very consistent. So I look at the tree and I don't look at that crack. I look at where it's going to balance best. So here's a piece of I don't know what. Any wood identifiers? Anybody? Okay, we'll call it wild elm. So with the chainsaw, like I said, I knock off the corners, and then I take the chainsaw. You don't want to put your drive center into bark, because bark's very soft. It'll just spin out, and then you can have an issue. So I'll try to center it. I do have a dot here that should be pretty close to center. We'll see. So lining up these two sides for balance of a finished piece is what you want to do, unless you have something unusual kind of coming off this side. So I did this with this a little higher because there was just something fun going on in there. So I decided to leave that in there as is. There's a school of thought. So if I go like this, by the way, at any point, if that bottom falls faster, I know that I'm off center. I want to have the tailstock right on the pith, as close as I can get. So when I do move, I want to, if possible, move the headstock. So a little this way. So to balance it, especially when your lathe is on roller skates, something I like is to stand on something when I'm turning. If you're turning all day, You probably don't want to be standing on concrete. At least I don't. Okay. Even if it's not, we'll just dance this lathe around a little bit. How fast am I turning? About that fast. I was gonna put a piece of tape over. What's funny is with my lathe, there's no speed. So I don't have any idea how fast I'm turning until this morning when I turned on this. Why is this? Okay. So turn to a speed you're comfortable. And when I get this thing to round and start working on the outside, I'll talk a little more about that. Always spin the wood before you start cutting. Start. Yes, green. Yeah, green. I only turn green. My preference is 30 to 40 seconds after it's cut, but that's pretty hard. I want it as green and fresh as possible. And I love it when water flies, and it's a lot of fun. This is green. It's not that dry though, but it's green. If I can get through this one, I'll throw a piece of holly up there and there'll be water flying everywhere. But I always turn green. I don't twice turn. One reason, along with a few other things that I do or don't do, is because I'm just impatient. I can't imagine I'm turning it to an inch and putting it in the corner for 6 months. I just can't wait. So I work a little too quickly. So, and you can see that this is kind of like that, but these corners are pretty good. Be careful with this lineup thing. So everybody's all focused on lining it up now. But what if that corner is a little higher? It's pretty flat and you got something a little off there. And because of the way you chainsawed it, now you have it all lined up and you're going to cut it. And when you cut it, it's still going to be off. So a lot of times I'll cut it to round and then I'll make my adjustment and I have to cut it again. So I just brought like every gouge I had because I didn't know if I had good edges on all of them. So 40-40 gouge. Why do I use the 40-40 gouge on this? Because somebody taught me that way. And a lot of the things I do with the 40-40 gouge is because of the angle of the grind. It just changes the angle. Where are we? Here we are. One comes at this angle and one comes at this angle. So you can come in much steeper here if you need to. If you come in steeper there, you're going to be way over here. So let me fire this baby up. Accidents happen when you have junky wood and when you turn it too fast. This lathe would not be shaking like this if it were on the floor. So we'll see what happens. So I'm just taking it to round. Might slow it down a little bit. Let's see here. Look out, you guys in front. If I can get it going faster, safely, I would be taking bigger bites. Now, the question always in turning demonstrations is how fast are you turning? You can turn at any speed. You can sand at any speed, but you have to traverse the wood slower at slower speeds. So turning at 448, I'm sure it's exact. I have to turn much slower. If I was turning at 800, it'd be a much quicker cut. Quicker cuts tend to be cleaner, but if you're turning slow and you're moving your tool too fast, forget it. It ain't gonna work. So once you have that little part round, you know that your tool rest can come right up to that round. Now I'm not trying to get it perfect because I'm cutting all that off anyway when I start shaping the board. So turn it a little faster now. This thing is going to come through the man, biting in. Maybe sharper. You hear people say about safety on a lathe, you'd never stand in the line of fire. Well, that's a misnomer because I can't cut from here to here without being in front of the lathe. It's impossible. Let's get a little closer. And when this happens, spins like this, I'm supposed to, as a demonstrator, it's like, oh yeah, this happens all the time. This is perfectly normal. It's not a big deal. So a little faster, you can see it's cutting cleaner and a sharper tool. Now it'll start bumping. Now I'm writing, rubbing, floating the bevel, call it whatever you want, but you know, that's what I'm doing. So I have it to round. But you're gonna, when you're cutting through air. Some people say air wood. So you're gonna get a little bumpiness here, especially at slower speeds when you're coming into this air, because you're cutting through here to get to there. And that's where you get the, how do you do that? When people look at natural edge, like, how did you cut from there? And why does it look like an oval? Well, because it kind of is. Okay, so I have it to round. You know what, I just probably stripped out everything there. So again, comfortable here. Now I'm going to flatten off the bottom of the lathe, and then I'm going to cut a tenon and what's called a base cut. Now I'll explain the base cut. So traverse, you notice on the last cuts when I had a little more speed, I was able to go across the wood quite a bit faster, and the cuts were pretty clean. So what's going to happen? I've had this all the way down here. How's that going to fit in a bowl? Well, you're going to cut in, and you'll be cutting like that across the bowl. So this won't be a problem. Part of it will be gone because I'll be cutting up into this area here. How fast am I going? So with this right here, I'm cutting. I'm going to use a little more of the blade. Generally, with this grind, you're using about 1/8 of an inch of that blade, but in a little more of a scraping cut, I'll use a little more once I get it flat. On dry wood, you're always going to be cutting with a smaller little piece of the tip, because of course dry wood's harder. Another thing about turning green is I won't be getting covered with too much dust, and I won't have to sharpen as frequently, which is really good because they don't have a grinder here. So you just sharpen like on the concrete that. So, and it cuts like butter. And John was talking about apricot cuts like an apple. I have some holly back here, which when you cut it, it feels like you're cutting an apple. I mean, it literally, it's like, oh, you said apple. Cutting is like cutting an apple. So I'm pretty close to round. I can get a little speed going here. So I'm at 800. I say that because everybody wants to know. So I'm flattening off the bottom. Now flat. Flat and square to a woodworker, you have to remember something very important that Proctor also taught me. Two very important words. Woods. Two important words. It's wood. It moves. It's a living organism. Even when it's dry, it moves a little bit. It's wood. Perfection, this has to be a perfect 90-degree angle. No, we just need to get it flat so we can work with it. unless you're using a glue block, which somebody else can demonstrate. So that one's a little concave, but it really doesn't matter. So now what I'm going to do is cut a tenon in here. And to cut the tenon, I'm going to kind of cut some of this wood away, and then generally by eyeball kind of get close to where the tenon's going to be. And then I'm going to use calipers to mark where the tenon's going to be. And then I'm going to make something called a base cut, which I'll explain. Too big a bite. Man. So cutting with the 60-degree grind, which you hear called, where am I here? Okay. You hear it called swept back bowl grind a lot. I sharpen with an 80 grit grinding wheel. And if anybody wants to see how badly they can cut themselves with it, come on over. 180 just makes it shiny and pretty, and it might be good for some people. 80 is plenty good for me. Now, when I come to the wood, with this tool, you want that flute at about a 40-degree angle, 45-degree angle, 45-degree angle, and you want it perpendicular with the wood. So at right angles to the wood. However, you also have to get the most efficient cut. So if you're perfectly here and perfectly here, and you don't get an efficient cut, play around a little bit, open it a little, close it a little, close it this way, because you have to find the most efficient cut. At this point, I'm not that concerned about this cut being totally smooth. I'm just kind of trying to waste wood away. But when I'm roughing the wood, here's my little things. I have parting gifts for everyone. This is digressing a bit. So when I'm roughing the wood to get it to round and just horsing off material, I want this also to be parallel to the ground. So that tool parallel to the ground. Your tool rest, and you've heard this many times, but I'm going to show you something that's going to save you some aggravation. You want to be cutting at the middle of your piece. If you drop the handle, it's fine. You're cutting a little above, but you want to be cutting at the middle. Well, every time you're moving your tail rest, but notice my tool rest, nothing's happening. So tip number 1 of the day. I have a little stop collar here. That stop collar makes sure that my 5/8 inch bowl gouge, if it's at parallel, is always going to be at dead center. So this saves me the up and down with the fingers as I'm moving that around. And it saves me a lot of time, and it helps my confidence because I have no confidence that I'm going to get this thing on center all the time. The only reason for me to have to drop this is if I have a 3/4 inch bowl gouge or something bigger than this 5/8 inch gouge. So if I use a 1/2 inch gouge, I just have to bump it up just a little bit. And then I have to play with it. But I also bought these little spacers, spark plug spacers, if I want to get really precise, and I can go in there. So that little stop is very helpful. So when I'm coming around this corner, though, I'm not roughing, so I'm dropping this, and it's making more of a slicing cut. So it'll make a little bit of a cleaner cut. To get it to level, and it's good practice, and there's parting gifts for everyone. I just put that in the flute, and I take my Allen wrench and I make sure it's level and tighten the Allen wrench. And if you want to practice and make sure you're at level, take this thing, just stick it on your tool. I know that when I'm at parallel, it's about 2/3 up the old love handle here. And that's where I try to work when I'm at parallel. Oh, it's a little bubble level, a little mini bubble level, not that big. So, and it works. It works. So let me get cutting again here. So I'm working on getting that tenon in there. So you see the tenon forming. Cutting too deep. Whoop. Turn it up a little bit. Man, oh man. So the bowl is not really taking form, but I'm just gently rounding it. When I get it in the tenon and turn it over, that's when I'm going to shape the bowl. So this tenon is way bigger than my chuck. So I'm going to mark it with these, which are the same distance, size of my chuck. Some people have different methods to do it. Take your tool, rest away. Another thing too, loosen this. If you ever had something happen and you crack into that, you will not be happy. So left edge only in to mark. If you hit this, it's going to come over the top. And I always get too close. We'll see what happens here. Okay, so we have some sort of line there. And then I have, a lot of people just use the scraper. I just have this little negative rake scraper. And the jaws of mine, this is dovetail jaws, and they're 10 or 11 degree angle. So I'm going to cut it at an angle, and then I'm going to cut this little shelf here a little concave. Perfectly flat is perfect, but if it's a little convex at all, then we have a problem. So I take the safe route, cut it that way. Speed this sucker up a little. So your eye position, if you're looking from back here, you can't tell if that's convex or concave. So you got to get your eyes over the top of that. And I'm going to need to cut it at a little bigger angle. So I'm just going to come here at the top. Kind of push it in a little bit. In this corner here, you want that very clean. How deep do you make that tenon? Here's your jaw chuck, your chuck jaw. And you can't make that tenon any deeper because if it hits here, you're not going to be able to get it in there and get it tight. This little area here has to be taken off flat because if it goes past the middle there, again, you won't be able to tighten down. So you can see that this is not too deep. So I'm going to take that off, and then I'm going to take this off because I'm having some problems there, and we'll turn it around and start working on the shape of which is the most important part. Any questions from anyone? No? Okay. God. Yeah. The flat surface, yeah, a little concave, just a little in at an angle. the chuck jaws are firm against that outside edge. Because if there's a little space there, you get a little wobble, and it doesn't take much wobble. I mean, any wobble and it'll pop out. It's not going to go flying and hitting the sign back there, but all of a sudden you'll find it. What speed do you want me to turn? Interestingly, if I was turning faster, I wouldn't get as many of those kind of where it stops because I'm taking big cuts. Faster, I'd plow right through those and wouldn't be getting it spinning on the headstock. I'm turning probably 800 to 900 to 1,000, depending upon exactly what I'm doing. But here, to take this little thing off the bottom, it won't be that fast. 600. I've never known how fast I was turning until today, because my lathe doesn't have the. And I thought I was turning a lot faster than I was, which is interesting. So now I'm just trying to take this down to flat. And I'm not that concerned about taking it all the way off, because I'm going to just chisel it off. And we're going to turn it around, then we're going to shape it. You see, when you're cutting, once again, where's my marker? So this bowl is cut out of the wood like this, whereas your other bowls are cut out of the wood like this. So you want to cut into supported grain. So on this bowl, I'm going to be cutting from bottom to top. On this bowl, I'm going to be cutting from top to bottom because each ring supports the other one. But when you're coming off the edge there, off the end, that's it. Any questions? It's not a great description, but when you're coming off the end here, you're cutting this way. There's nothing supporting that at the end, so it's just kind of coming off, and so you're going to get some little tear out things here. And if you're trying to save the bark for a live edge bowl, then you would be coming this way, because if you're coming this way, it is supported by the rest. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to save the bark. I'm trying to save the bark. So what I'm going to do now is take a chisel and just chisel that off. Yeah, and when you chisel it off, you want the long grain here. You chisel it with the grain, you run a much higher risk of it just tearing out, just peeling back and tearing out. So you want it to be across the grain. When I drop it on your foot, there's an angle here that is creating. Turn it over. Really? Yeah, we're okay. Again, doesn't matter how perfect, you just don't want it sticking above your tenon. Okay. When you take out your drive center, don't put your hand in front of it. Just kind of gently put your hand under there and give it a few taps. It definitely puts many holes in you. So I throw it a little bit to get it a little tight, but not overly tight. So this tool to tighten, what I did is did a little because if you have a bowl that's this big, then you can tighten it like that. Kind of fun. So push it in evenly. You don't want it like that. No air there. Evenly. And tighten. And it's concentric chuck. If you tighten one of it, it pulls in evenly, but everyone always talks about doing it on all sides. And I think part of that is so they can see if there's any space between the chuck. Okay. Always bring up the tailstock just in case. Now I didn't make much of a base cut, so when I'm working from here, I'm actually going to come in somehow and make a base cut. And what the base cut does, so you're coming in, so your chuck is holding it here. Chuck. And you have this little extra cut here. What that does is it helps you start defining your base. If you're cutting down to here, you can't even see what's going on with the bottom of your bowl, and you run the risk of this little area right here cutting through it, trying to keep that as your bottom. So that base cut kind of helps you define that. Gives you a little room to work with. And my base cut is not big enough, so we'll see what happens. So when I'm getting to a finishing stage, I'll be cutting all the way from top to bottom, but here I'm just going to kind of try to make that base cut a little bigger and create something down here. Now, when you turn that bowl around, okay. So I'm making it, when you turn it around, the reason you don't finish a green bowl or a green piece of wood is because when you turn this thing around, very rarely are you going to be perfectly round. So when you get it back in the chuck, you're going to have to shape it a little bit to get it back to round. So always going to start with the first cut here and then work this way, kind of get it back to round before I start shaping it. Notice that when I come to the end of the cut, so I'm cutting like that. When I come, I close it down, so I bring it to 12 o'clock. When the tool's like that, it won't cut. If you leave it open like that and you get to a very big edge, and you get too much of this tool into the wood, that's when you'll get a catch. If you have it like that and you have a little bit in the wood, you're fine. Close it down, it won't cut. But if you have it open like that, you have too much of that tool into the wood and you'll get a catch. Is a catch the end of the world? No, it'll just like scare you. And then when you do get a catch, take a look at it, see what happens. But it's generally too much of the tools into the wood. So I'm going to refine that a little bit. So you close it down, stops cutting. So now I'm going to start shaping it from the top. Now I can't start right at the top because I can't take off this much wood. So I'm just going to start nipping it, start defining my shape. So you see my body. With cutting on a lathe, you want to move your body. And you hear at every demonstration, they talk about moving your body. If you start moving arms and hands, you don't have as much control. whether it's against your body here, braced, moving your body, using the big muscles instead of your little fine motor skill muscles. And against here, I'm just moving like that. Right now, I'm not that concerned with riding the bevel. Everybody familiar with the bevel is? So you hear about riding the bevel. Riding the bevel is going to give you a cleaner cut, and I'll be doing that as I get closer and closer to the finished cut. But right now, I'm just kind of horsing off wood. You see, I'm stopping down into here. I get down into there. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to hit the metal, but I don't want to hit the metal. Notice every time I move it, spin it. Excited to see how fast I'm turning. 748. By the way, tools dropped a little bit because I'm actually doing a slicing cut. That bump is because I'm cutting through air, and you'll see the bump stop right there. So I'm past the saddle. Now I'll go backwards and clean that up. And you see where that base cut is starting to define my bottom. You don't want that base cut to come in and be this curvy thing. You need really a sight line down there. You need to see where that ends. But you can see if I'm going into this chuck where my base is, I'm coming down here. And where's that thing going? How much space do I have down in there? Just works better with the base cut. And that's what David Ellsworth said, so I just agreed. Didn't want to argue with him. He'd yell back at me. Not because it's me. So you see what is happening when I'm cutting from this corner through air. And even though I have pretty good tool control, it's going to go in a little bit and bump. But you want to have really a light touch. When you strangle this thing, you're going to be going like that. But you want to have it braced and not over. First of all, over gripping a tool is going to make you a lot more tired by the end of the day. So be gentle as you can, if you can. When I'm cutting, I'm not looking at the tool. I'm looking where the cut is going on the top. So that the tool is here, I'm watching right here to see where the tool is going. When you ride a bicycle, do you look at the pedals or do you look out ahead of you? So if I'm looking here, I don't know what's going on in front of me. So you can see it, and it's kind of cool because you can see exactly where that curve's going. So when I get to where the flat spot is gone, I don't have to make this any smaller. But now I had a little visitor. Guys brought a little spider. Oh, it's an ant. What's amazing about bugs is anybody turned a log that has those like little white worms in it? They're a resilient bunch. They love a carnival ride. You can turn them at 1,000 RPMs and you think they're going to go flying. And then you look back and they're still staring at you. Look at this thing. Look out in the front row. You might be getting a spider or whatever this is. So I'm going to pick the cut back up here. I don't want to go off the end. That'll scare you. Okay, so I was doing a slicing cut. So braced against my body, moving the whole body, 45 degrees, handle dropped a bit, perpendicular to the tool. But then I'm When I'm out of space, then I start playing to find an efficient cut to get me as close as I can to there. So, form. You're 12 feet away in the middle there. Is that a good form? What do I need to do to that form? Because you can see that really well. No, I'm good right here. This guy likes it. Another way to look at it, so if it's on your table, unless your table is on its side, so very scientific, just look at it like it's on your table. So it's a pretty good continuous curve. So I'll go with that. Now, to smooth it out, I'm going to do what's called a shear scrape. I'm going to get a sharp tool. So when you sharpen this tool, on the inside there, there's a little burr. You can actually feel it. And that's the cutting action on a shear scrape. Shear scrape's a very different kind of cut. I generally like to cut toward the headstock when I turn, because you have like 400 pounds here that you're just cutting toward. So you got a lot of stability. And here you have a thing that's kind of heavy, but there's not as much stability. With a shear cut, it's a shear scraping cut. So you're addressing this whole edge to the wood, but very lightly. Your pressure is against the tool rest and very little pressure on the wood, and you got to keep it moving. One thing with cutting wood, so you're swinging to cut it, whichever way you're doing. If you stop cutting, the tool will continue to cut. So if you stop cutting and you leave the tool there, the tool's not stopping cutting because the phone rang. It's going to keep cutting. So to stop cutting, you can shut it down, just pull it away from the wood. But when you're cutting, that's why it has to be a smooth motion. So if you're like this, you're going to cut a little bit of a gouge. It's impossible not to not do it to be perfect. If you go like this and you take a turn, you're going to cut a little high spot. So the practice is how can I get the tool to swing, like a baseball batter to swing in an arc without a turn. If you're going to do a piece that goes like that and then goes to a curve and it's flat on the side, don't try to make that turn in one pass. Do the flat part and then do the curved part. So like this, like that, you're going to round over that edge. So if you're halfway down a cut, you can pick the cut up again, but don't stop to cut. You can see, I cannot believe this. What is this thing? Pretty smooth cut top to bottom. So I'm going to shear cut. So shear cutting is hard on this tool rest because you got to drop this handle down about 45 degrees. And when you get to here, this tool rest gets in the way. You end up hitting it right there. So I put the tool rest in an area where there's a little gap here, a little triangle. And that's where you're going to scrape here. You shear scrape in there and then you move the tool rest. You don't want to ever get too far over the tool rest. If you get a catch, it'll pop you up. So here's what a shear scrape looks like. So this here, 2 fingers on the tool rest, very little pressure against the tool. And the shavings you get are these fine little shavings if you're doing it correctly. So what that's going to do at the top there, this will allow me to start sanding it, 180. Sandpaper is not a shaping tool. A lot of people say it is. I don't like sanding. I want to start sanding at the finest grit I can. With sandpaper, for me, it's to remove some high and low spots and as a smoothing tool. But So I want to get those humps and bumps. And the way to feel humps and bumps is close your eyes and just bring your fingers over it. So this is pretty good. You know, there's some small little things, but it's not, from a shaping standpoint, it's pretty good. I'm gonna now shear scrape to the bottom there. And then we'll start hollowing this sucker out. With a shear scrape, those with good eyesight, I don't always look at the top. When you're shear scraping, there's a little fine line. There's no way to show it on the camera. It'll traverse across the wood, and you can see this little line moving. If the line stops moving, you know you have a little dip. So you go back and you cut it till that line continues to go all the way. So this is pretty good. And interestingly, there's a little tear out here on the end grain, but that can be taken care of with sandpaper. We'll talk about sanding later. So there we have the outside of the bowl. I look like that, pretty good. And I'm a little nervous because this is an amazing piece of wood. So whatever it is, it's curly all the way. It's going to be a pretty neat piece of wood. So we'll see what we do. I have a robust American Beauty lathe. So I'm used to turning off the end of the lathe. So I'm going to scoot the headstock down instead of leaning and climbing and hitting myself on the roller skates. So we'll take this tailstock off. If you did that to the headstock, it would take 3 or 4 people to do it. Kaboom. I'll drink some water too. Any questions? Okay, so our cameraman's gonna, sharp tools are amazing. If I did that shear scraping cut with the tool that I've been cutting with, I wouldn't be getting this. It'd be fine, but don't hesitate to get to your grinder. And I promise you that I have a lot of tools that are shorter than I want them to be, because that's what happens when I was learning how to sharpen, and I am learning how to sharpen. Believe me, there's no there. So as I get better, I'm looking for try to get better. So I've ground many inches off many tools, and always look for a deal. When they're on sale, I buy them. And remember, I'm only learning how to really sharpen 2 tools. So I'll be off the end of the lathe here. If you have to reach over and you can't get your headstock there, which is fine, start out here, bring it here. And again, it's the movement. Bring it, hits the body, and there. So you have all this bark in the way. The bark is going to create a little, so we want to get rid of the bark. So I'm going to kind of come into the middle and get rid of the bark. And you'll see the way that's going to look. What I will do is I get closer and closer to the edge, I'll get a little more careful with my cuts to make sure that I'm defining the thickness of the bowl. And I'll show you a few examples of some of the things that happen when I work with my son or something to teach him how to turn. But the bark will create some issues. When you're entering the wood on a natural edge bowl or with bark, it's a little different than entering on a flat edge bowl. On a flat edge bowl, you want to enter closed and then enter the wood and then open it up, make your cut. If you enter like this at your 45 on flat top of a bowl, it's going to ride back because it's going to catch a little bit of that middle or back edge, and it's just going to, again, not going to do anything, but it'll create a little cut. Something I forgot to mention, when you're cutting a moving cut on any vessel, on anything in wood turning, you are cutting a spiral. There is no way against it. Just from a physics standpoint, as you move it up, you're cutting a spiral. The faster it's turning and you get your speed at which you traverse your tool, your spiral will be less noticeable. What that shearing cut does is it just takes off a little more. You're still cutting a spiral and you're getting closer and closer and closer to smooth. But how can you not cut a spiral if you're moving from here to here and something's spinning? I didn't really talk about speed, and I don't know if these statistics are 100% accurate, but at dead center on this bowl, or any object spinning on a lathe, at dead center, it's turning 0 miles an hour. At 1,000 RPMs at 8 inches, this is turning 40 miles an hour. If you're turning 1,000 RPMs on a 10-inch bowl, you're cutting half a mile of shavings every 30 seconds, which I think is just amazing. I don't know if you do. I think it's amazing. That's why you sharpen your gouge a lot more than you sharpen. I sharpen this tool. This tool I cut about 3 inches every bowl, and this tool I cut about 5 miles. So that's just some interesting things. With the natural edge bowl, you can enter already at that angle. And I'm not going to worry about the bevel following the outside of the bowl until I get a little closer. And I'll show you some of the cuts that I've seen that are really natural to do to kind of make it a little more difficult to make this bowl. I'll turn the speed down, make sure everything. So I'm going to start my whole body out here. You can see it bumping. This tool's not sharp. Something else that happens on green wood is the bevel gets stuff on it. That's one thing nice about a leather glove, is it's pretty durable, just to knock some of that stuff off. But I don't think that tool is that sharp. So we'll see what we got. I'm like hitting the. So tools at parallel, open to 45 degrees. That's some nasty bark. I don't know why I keep the bark on. You know, you can get an air hammer and you can take the bark off before you ever put this thing on the lathe. One thing that you can also do if you get an air hammer is you end up chunking the lathe off and you take a piece of your natural edge off and you go, I just ruined my natural edge bowl. So I don't mess with taking the bark off. And the bark also gives me a little bit of an entry before I get to the wood to kind of control the cut. So there's like a cone here. Got the camera? So you see this cone. So I'm leaving some bulk in the middle of this thing because as I get out to the edge, having some mass and weight in the middle is going to make it a little easier to cut that edge to keep it from moving and vibrating. Because this thing is drying as I'm spinning it. And as I get thinner, if I go to lunch, somebody asked that, if I go to lunch and don't cover this and put some chips in it, it's going to be out of round in half an hour. So I'm working my way. So I'll show you a cut so when you're starting and trying to learn, what happens is a cut like this, it's very difficult to get in the habit of driving this tool toward the headstock. So the cut comes in like this and everybody kind of goes like this and comes straight across. So then we end up thin here and super thick there. And it's just something I've seen. It's hard to get in the habit as a beginner or turning bowls to drive this thing toward the headstock. It's very easy to kind of pull back and do that because I guess it's somewhat scary. So I just made that cut on purpose. So as you're turning this piece, you see that this is narrower than that. And why is that? Because the top of the bowl, as I'm going in the bowl is thicker 1 inch down where this saddle is. So a good way to tell that you have an even edge is the thickness of that, and that is the same. And that's a starting point when you're picking out, when you're deciding upon the thickness of your bowl. And I could show more severely that. So you want this and this to be the same thickness. There's a little optical illusion, or a little sight illusion there, in that when something's on a slant, it's always going to appear. So that's on this plane here. So it's always going to look thicker because you're flat here. And when you get to that plane here, it's going to look thinner. Does that make sense? So fingers are good to measure. So we'll keep going here. Trying to find a place to put my feet and my body. See, I turned it, shut it down, so it's not going to cut. If I go in there straight, probably too much blade on the wood, I might get a little catch. So I cleaned that up pretty good. So now if you looked at that and that, they're the same thickness. Once they're the same thickness, I know that when I'm cutting, you know, when you start a cut, when you start cutting and you see how deep the cut is, you see that little line. So I know if I keep cutting at that thickness, then now I've got the thickness. But I'm going to keep going. Why not? So all that kind of roughness is because of that bark. Now I want to get it down past this bark line, and then life becomes much easier. And when I'll get down another 1/2 inch, and then I'll show you a little smoothing cut and start working my way down. So these cuts that I'm closer to the edge, now I'm watching and watching the bevel. So the bevel is following the curve of the bowl, of the outside. So the outside's matching the inside. When that bevel follows, the outside and the inside are matching. And that's what we try to do all the way to the bottom. Easier said than done. So now when you're out here, I still have space to do what's called a finishing cut. The finishing cut is the one cut where you're actually using the back edge of the gouge. Sorry, boss. The back edge of the gouge. So the finishing cut on a flat rim bowl, you have to shut it down and then get into the bowl and then open it up. Because there's no consistent edge hitting that tip, you can just come in the finishing cut right like that. And here's what it looks like. One more thing. Eyes and the angle of your eyes. If you're here and you're cutting and you're looking at this with your right eye, your right eye, you're going to cut over here. You have to get directly in line with where you're cutting so you can see that edge. And best, if you pick one eye, line that one eye up. So everybody do a little experiment here. Hold a finger up, close your right eye. Open your right eye, close your left eye. You're seeing two very different things. So there's these little things in wood turning where you have to see down the line. And make sure you have the correct eye and you're not kind of looking across. So you want to line that eye up. So there's very few tool marks there. So I don't even know if I'll do the finishing cut. Well, I don't think it needs it. That's pretty smooth. Okay, so getting closer to the wood. So I'm going to take this. I always have the tool rest about an inch, inch and a half past the center of the bowl. So I spin it. So now I'm closer and I can work my way further down. So now I'm going to work my way to the next inch. Work, work, work. Going this middle here, I'm not that concerned that it's perfect, but you'll see it kind of naturally. It's going to be along the correct line. Take that thing off. I need to turn a little faster. See something here. So you see when I was getting in there and I started feeling some bumping. I knew something was going on in there because it was smooth, smooth. So if you look, we got a little naughty bit in there. So as I'm cutting, I'm hitting this thing. Now it's not going to be an issue and it probably is not coming out the bottom. So you might be able to cut it away, but it might be something we're going to have to contend with. In fact, it might just ruin the whole thing as we look at the bottom. If it comes out all the way out the bottom, you know, it still look good, but who cares? We'll find a way around it. But maybe some little bugs got in there. I'm not big on filling holes with super glue and everything, but it's a pretty cool piece of wood. So you saw it bumping at the end there? It was hitting that thing. Now I'm getting closer to the thickness now. So now I start taking that bevel and I start rubbing it and a lot more concerned about the direction of the bevel. That back cut that I was talking about, you can't take too much off. It's really meant to be a very gentle, soft cut. So you'll see what it looks like in a second here. Okay, so I'm going to pull back and you'll see this cut. I'm barely pushing. Now we got to make sure we didn't, I'll show you the old fashioned thickness measuring machine. And I feel I got plenty of wood here. I'm going to cut away more. So with this, you make it bigger than the start. And you want, as you move through the wood, these have to be directly apart from each other because if you're in the wood and you're crooked like that, they're not going to measure accurately. One hand on it, because if you have two, you're going to push them together. So I'm good till there. I'm good till there. And right there, I start getting thicker. Not a ton, but I can pick up the cut here and get a little thinner. The second to last cut should be your last cut. Always remember that. The second to last cut, which will be after my third to last cut. So notice, not gripping the tool, it was just on top. This was just gently riding it down the curve. You start pushing and gripping, your tool is going to be over here, and your bowl is going to be over there. So pretty good, pretty smooth. I'll take it. Now we got to deal with that sucker. Uh-oh. Not uh-oh, but that little naughty bit went dead center here. So I don't know where that thing ends. Oh, we're going to find out. So I'm going to come in. If you have your tool right down there at dead center, face just like that, you have a drill bit. You can just, and I've seen turners just go, and just drill a hole. So when you're coming to that center, you want to be here with that finishing cut that I showed you. Now I've got some wood to remove there. So I'll probably make one more normal cut. So I'm rubbing that bevel, pick up the cut. Slowing down. Slowing the cut down. Remember, it's turning 30 miles an hour out here, 25, it's turning 0 here. So it changes the speed of that traverse. As you're getting closer to the center, you slow that cut down. Up right through the middle. I got one more finishing cut in there. 2 more. 3 more, and then I'll stop on the second to last cut. So something that, I hear is, well, it kind of bumps up at the end. Well, there's just, again, it's experience and feel. You're just kind of pushing that thing in just a little bit to keep it going down. So I got a hump right here I'm going to take out. Okay, let's see what this looks like. And then you just take the whole lathe and you just turn it up like that and stick it on your table. And you got a bowl. So, we have this bark and, we can say that we have a, get a marker and do that. We got a little bark going here. But that's pretty, oh, there's still a hump there. Should I? Let's see how thick it is. It could be enough. One more. One more. That might have to be sanded off. So let me talk about this whole other way to make a bowl. Guys, I'm not quitting. Either I'm going to eat this bowl instead of eating out of it, or I'm going to take that hump out. Okay. Second to last cut that was. So if I had a bowl, there's a little hump there, and it was really deep. And there's a lot of reasons for this 40-40 gouge and efficiency of the cut and a lot of other things. But if I have a bowl that's super deep and I'm trying to get in here, I'm like over here, coming down the side of that bowl, it's just not possible. With this thing, I'm going down the side of the bowl like that. So the 40-40, there's takes some time to learn how to cut, but there's some advantages just in angles. Your ability to get into some tight spots. Can't get into there. Can get into there. You see with that 60 degree, you're toast. Just the change of the degree, and get right in there. So when you watch Stuart Batty, he's the best demonstrator in the world. And he's what he makes, there's no humps and bumps. The guy's unbelievable. Unbelievable. But it's a different way to cut. It's a beautiful way to cut. I do it sometimes. On this one, I didn't do any. So what I'll do with this, I would just break the bark off. You know, or whatever, cut it off, sand it off. We can do that later. So now we're okay on time. We'll get the bottom. I'm pulling up on this thing because on my lathe, to move the headstock, it's here. Let's get this thing done. Give me some room. Okay. So we have to know where the bottom of the bowl is. If we didn't have that base cut, we'd be down deep into this, and we wouldn't even know where the bottom of the bowl was. We've got this. So back to the eyeball thing. Right eye, left eye. So dead bottom of that bowl, and I'll find the high spot. So I've got my right eye going straight down, except I don't have the right tool. I usually use my knockout bar, but this knockout bar is like 30 feet long, so can't get the leverage. So I just put my finger where I see it, that eye, and I keep that right eye, line it up there, and I switch eyes. And I'm looking straight down this. So if I don't trust it, I'll just do it twice and see what happens. See if it's the same. Pick my spot. Didn't look the same. Do it a third time. And there's all kinds of weird tools to do it with. And okay, so the first one was pretty close. So the bottom of my bowl is here. So now I have to decide my base. So let's say this is 3/16 of an inch. So I got, that's going to be, keep this the same thickness. And then let's say I want my base that thick. So those are my 3 lines. We're going to reverse it, put it on a jam chuck, cut the bottom off, and then throw it somewhere. This is how you bruise your hand. You'll notice that most of my movements are with my whole body. Even loosening, tightening, lifting, moving, doing this all the time. Again, it's going to make you more tired. My secret weapon, a friend of mine that's in the machine shop business, he made me this little thing. There's some imperfections, but we're working on it. Just go like that. A couple taps, and that shows me what dead center is on my bowl. Just jam chuck. There are many ways to do it. This is just my chosen way. A little tight. Okay. So what is this stuff? Drawer liner for shelf liner. There you go. Bam. Bring that live center right into that dot. Give it a little wiggle as you're doing. Closing it. How tight to make it? I've made it too tight and the end. Just so it doesn't slip. So I know that this bowl is ending about there. So I'm going to take this, bring it up to about there, and make some decisions with my base. What I want to do with my base. I want to take a look to see there might have been a bumpity bump there. Is that, yep, a little thing came through. So I'm going to make the base a little smaller than that, and possibly I'll cut past that. Possibly. We'll see. So that cut, if you go too far, you're going right into the shape of your bowl. So now I'm going to do is take my bevel and I'm going to rub it right on there and then kind of open it up to pick the cut and follow the bottom of that bowl. And I think I'll just do a little OG. So it'll come in like that or about like that. So it's a subtractive process. You'd rather cut it a little big and dig in too far. And I got that in there pretty good. So there's going to be some little holes and stuff. It's not going to matter. So now I'll take that in. Because it's green, so I'm going to undercut it just a little bit. And then when it's dry, I'll be able just to sand the bottom off or not. I have a lot of little wobblers there. So here's what that looks like. It's interesting. You got that little bump. So we talked about the angle of the 40-40. So that's going to allow me never move it while it's moving or whatever they say. Every demonstrator says that. Close it down. So if you feel some bumping, which I don't yet, this process is over. So stop it. So I just undercut that a little bit. And then bring out this sucker. So there's some tear out in here, but should be able to sand that out. Okay, so now we have that. How do we get it off? Just a little spindle gouge. Okay. If you take the bowl off and tear it off, you're going to get a peel right along the grain. So you want to cut it off. So here's what that looks like. Shut the lathe off. Just push it through. If it doesn't, and it kind of shows how strong wood is, that thing's still holding there. pretty good. Don't tell anybody about that hump. So let me sand that off. And that baby is a nice curly, whatever you guys call it, when I call the wood. Bowl. There you have it. So you can take a look or whatever. Oh, so I told Charlie I have a little list. If everybody has a few minutes of, we're going to kind of turn the cameras off. Okay. I have a list of just some fun things and some fun suppliers that I don't want to talk about with everybody. Here's like a little handout. You can just kind of, I don't know if I have enough. So there's some fun things that I have and use and do that I get a kick out of that I want to show you, talk about. Places to go. I'll just step out front here. Should I stay on camera or are you recording still? I should stay on camera. Well, I'm talking about all these vendors and places to people and okay. So where's my list? One thing is a broken can. Plastic cleaner and polish for your face masks. Amazingly works very well, better than soapy water. Okay. So for equipment, I'm going to go back to here. Yoza. As far as your lathe, the lathe you use, just buy the lathe within your means, of course. But if your lathe isn't really heavy, do everything you can to make it heavy. Sandbags, concrete, do something to make that thing heavier. It just adds stability. If you have a piece that's 4 inches and it's off center, it's going to wobble even on a big lathe. So if you have I have a jet, I started on a little jet and just make it heavier. So that's the first thing. Stand on something that's not concrete is always helpful. Even if it's a couple pieces of cardboard, it just helps your legs and your back. So some of these suppliers that I found like through my years as a kid when my dad, so John Henry Foster, everybody has air in their shop and you want to run air around your shop. A lot of people, most people are going to Harbor Freight and they're buying fittings and stuff. John Henry Foster is a huge company. All they do is air and pneumatic hoses and parts, and they have everything. And it's a riot to go there. They also repair compressors. They sell compressors, but I put together all these crazy quick disconnects and manifolds. And one of the most amazing things are these shark bites. So they sell this hose. They also sell hard pipe, but I don't think they sell it. But these little shark bites, it's amazing, but they hold air. So I go around my shop with just these things and just bend them and zip tie them to the electrical conduit, run it around my shop. Their hoses are going to be less expensive. If you want straight hoses in any dimension, you say, I want an 8-footer this dimension with these ends on it. They'll make it while you wait. It's just a fun place. And I get lost in the parts. It's a riot. As far as fasteners, also John Henry Foster sells this stuff. I haven't used it. It's called Rexroth. It's amazing. Unistrut and parts for Unistrut is one thing this next company has, but what they have mostly is every screw, every nut, every bolt, and every style and every size known to man. It's called an inventory sales, and it's just south of Lutheran South High School up there, just in a little industrial park. And you can buy one screw, one bolt, or 10,000. You can buy a bolt that's 36 inches long by 2 inches that they put bridges together with. And it's just a neat place. If you ask them, they'll walk you back in this warehouse. They have 5 acres of just nuts, bolts, and fasteners. It's amazing. I don't know. I use Abernet sandpaper. I don't always sand green, but this sand, oh, here's Abernet. I don't know if anybody's familiar, everybody's familiar. But it's great because when it gets clogged, you can just take your air compressor and blow the dirt out generally from the back. Lasts forever. So I sand with that. Magnets, I love magnets. These suckers, I bought these at an auction. You know, for like, I don't even know what they cost, but if you can get these online, these things are on, they're so strong that you have to put this felt pad, stick them on something, and they hold along my lathe, they hold everything. But another great thing is I can take a nut and two nuts and a bolt, stick it out like that, stick it on my lathe, hang my air gun on there, all these little tools. This is great. That stop collar I talked about is just a time saver. Notice when I was turning, I didn't have to pay attention one time to ups and downs and where the tool rest is. This is pretty funny here. So Harbor Freight, they sell these for like $2 and they last about 2 seconds. And they pick up about half a pound. So I said, I have to find a better one. I go online and I go on the best gripper pickup tool. And the front of the thing shows a lady with a 9-foot thing picking an apple off a tree. I said, bingo. So made in America. This thing, I never bend over to pick up anything anymore because I'm preparing for the future. This thing will pick up 9 pounds. It's called the gripper. I mean, not cheap, but my back is worth more than that. I mean, it's not that expensive. Art supplies, I know a place. Just oh geez. So they're not open today. So when just John knows what he's doing, but he doesn't know everything about art supplies. When he talked about those Pitt pens, he said the binder is what makes them light fast. And I'm like, I didn't want to jump in. It's the pigment that makes them light fast. So we have a ton of products to use if you're coloring, metallic powders, paint, all kinds of cool mechanical pencils and measuring stuff as well. But if you're painting anything, if you're doing the basket illusion, you want to use something that is pigmented. So if it says that it's a dye, it is going to fade. Now, it's not going to fade away totally in our lifetime, but there's liquid acrylics, fluid acrylics by Gold and liquid acrylics by Daler Rowney and Liquitex that are light fast. All of the Pitt products, including their pencils, colored pencils, are very good products. They're expensive, but they're very good. And they're all pigmented. So make sure to use pigmented products if you want your pieces to last forever. So, that's that. We love seeing you. If sign up for our emails if you want to get swamped and inundated with emails that have coupons all the time. So I'm going to go into one more thing, but any questions about this silliness that I did here? Oh, the stop collar is what I talked about. That's on my tool rest. Oh, I hate to say the word, but Amazon, yeah. And I mean, they're 4 for $20 maybe. I don't know what they are, but they have 3/4 inch if you're 3/4 inch. But it really just saves a little of that bumping and moving and everything from me. So, there's some fun stuff, and none of it I don't think is expensive. But tools. Somebody was talking about fishing. It's like that lure. Woohoo! All these tools I have, and I'm still making funnels and lampshades and stuff, going through the bottom. It's it's the user, not the person with the tools. So I'm going to talk about like social media and YouTube and Instagram. Yes, sir. Oh, I think it's just the gripper. I don't even know. They're such a great company. They don't even put their, oh, Grapplers Inc. You can't even see it on it. But be careful, but you might be on the chain gang picking up trash on the highway. They give references. Oh, he bought 6 of them. So yeah, it's a pretty good thing here. Okay, YouTube and Instagram. If you're on YouTube or Instagram, or if you're messing around on social media, it's you can get lost. And importantly, as a craftsman, you can watch people that don't know what they're doing and are really bad. I've seen great demonstrators that aren't very good wood turners, and I've seen bad demonstrators that are great wood turners. But what to do? So if I'm talking about YouTube, find out what you do in wood turning and search for it, whether it's pens, platters, whatever you're making bowls, you're making hollow forms, you're doing segmented turning. There's a lot of people out there that are good. In fact, a lot of the people that are at these symposiums, the one that was here in St. Louis or Chicago or Memphis, are on YouTube, and they're not always on there doing their own videos, and I'll get to that in a second. So I put a little list here of some of the people I like watching. And if you look at one of the best it's Turn a Wood Bowl. And I don't even know his name, but very well produced and very good. There are a couple here, Richard West and the Steve Caligarakis, that just turn and there's no sound. They don't talk. They just play music, and it's really cool. This Richard West is unreal. So there's a list of some of the people that are really high quality wood turners that you're not going to learn anything wrong from them. Remember, you're going to learn something different from every one of them, because every one of them turns differently, without a doubt. And what you'll start seeing, if you watch a David Ellsworth demonstration, it's like the coaching tree. Like, these are all the descendants. So if you look at Turn a Wood Bowl or Trent Bosch, you'll see, or Mike Mahoney, you'll see them using the style, the grind, and a lot of the things that David Ellsworth, used, but they all have their own little twist. Richard Raffin, I put Ricard, but Richard Raffin is one of the pioneers. And then I put wood turners of St. Louis, Dallas, NorCal, Northern California, the Colorado group. Go through some of those, and that's where you'll see a David Ellsworth or Stuart Batty demonstration, and they're usually too long. They're usually an hour and a half. And you can watch these guys from start to finish and pick up things from them, and it's really cool. It's really cool. So wood turners, fill in the blank, and we're starting to post some of ours, I think, and I think you can learn a lot from those. Instagram is a very visual medium, and I put a list of some of the guys to look at there. Again, find out kind of what you like looking at. I've just become kind of attracted and attached to like the Japanese aesthetic. So I look at a lot of the Japanese wood turners and ceramicists. Don't eliminate the ceramics artists, because most wood turners from the past, they were ceramics artists. So kind of, again, find out what you like to see, and you can find all day long. And I have a list here of some of the people that I like. And if you want to, build a big list, go to like Maui Wood Turner. It's Avelino. What's his name? Not Avelino. Emiliano Achaval from Hawaii. And just go to his friends and start checking off, looking at and say, oh yeah, that's what I like to do. I like to do platters, and just start following the platter makers, and you'll start seeing different things and seeing how they do it. You'll see 10-second, 15-second of them cutting. And it's pretty neat. And my new guy, and I'd love to get him up here, is a guy named Matt Monaco. He's this 36-year-old African-American from Springfield, Missouri area. He is so good, it's beyond belief. And he's very passionate about getting young people, kids involved in wood turning. And he's an amazing wood turner. So I watch him, and he always posts these 10-15-second things of him cutting. And I'm like, this guy, it's like, I don't think he owns sandpaper. So there's some things I didn't put my email address, but if anybody wants to email me, just guess. No. Um, no, you know, if you have any questions, if there's anything that you want to ask about. Um, I was a permit driver. This was my first demonstration, so there's a lot coming at me, but I appreciate it, and hopefully again I'll be able to get up to you. And I think the next time I'll do it Stuart Batty way. I'll do it with 40-40 grind and a bottom bowl gouge, and then we'll really blow up a bowl. But I appreciate your attentiveness, and any questions afterwards, you want to see anything, just I'll hang around till they turn the lights off. 'Cause I don't have anything to do. Appreciate it. Thank you.